Okay, we are now recording. And I am now sharing my slides, I believe. Okay. Right, welcome everyone more formally to our weekly call. Hope you all had a fabulous week and, more importantly, fabulous weekend. And thank you to our sponsors, DNS OARC, long-term sponsors of the call. Okay, by way of an agenda, quite a packed agenda this week. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the interesting things on the agenda for the forthcoming RIPE 91 meeting, which takes place in Bucharest a week today. So coming up quite soon. I'm then going to spend a few minutes talking about the recent IAB W3C workshop on age-based restrictions on content access. Just share a few sort of immediate reflections on that, and then at least a couple of the people on the call that were there who can chip in. I might quickly, as a non-agenda item, quickly touch on a couple of side meetings coming up. The forthcoming IETF 124 meeting, and then talk about highlights from OARC 45, which will be a crowdsourced discussion. And then, time permitting, we'll run to some of the sort of more interesting recent developments in the news from the last week or so, calls for papers, etc., etc. So that's the plan for the call. So we'll see how it works. Okay, so dipping straight in then to kick off with the RIPE 91 preview. I'm not sure how legible this is. It's not critical, but I just put on the screen a screen grab of the actual meeting for the actual agenda for the meeting, which, you know, compared to a number of other fora, is relatively straightforward. Many of the sessions are just a single session in a given time slot in the main plenary room. On occasion, there's also the use of a side room as well. But if you can sort of squint at the screen a bit, you'll see that probably about 50% of the time it's just in plenary, and the other 50% there's a choice of sessions running, and it runs through from Monday the 20th October through to midday on Friday the 24th, so 4.5 days. And all I'm going to do at this stage is just to highlight the things of most immediate interest. This is unapologetically very subjective. So if you're going and you think I've missed anything important, feel free to shout out as I go along. First things first, though, the sort of main business of the meeting really kicks off sort of Monday lunchtime. There is a newcomers introduction and newcomers lunch. The introduction starts at 11:30, runs till 12:30 on Monday the 20th. That's immediately followed by a newcomers lunch from 12:30 till 2. For most of the rest of the people, the session proper starts with the opening plenary at 2 o'clock. There is a workshop in the morning. I can't remember the topic, but that won't be applicable to everyone. So you will see people arriving through Monday morning. And as I say, I just subjectively picked out a few things of interest from some of the sessions. So I'm not going to talk about everything in every session, take too long, and won't be especially interesting. So the first thing I sort of pulled out in the second plenary, so not the opening plenary, but later on the Monday, 4 p.m. local time. There are 3 topics within that plenary session that I've called out as being of potential interest, which are monitoring root DNS prefixes, evolution of measurement of the measurement lab platform, and residential proxies, a double-edged sword for network research. So just 3 topics, varying lengths. I can't remember the exact length of each of those slots, but they're all within that plenary. Probably not a great deal more to add to those. There's more detail, to be fair, if you go to the RIPE 91 site. But those 3 topics looked of interest to me, as did the BOF, which follows immediately afterwards. Well, nearly, sorry, there's a break actually, that's not true. From 6 till 7 p.m. local time, which is updating ICP2. Discussing the second draft RAR governance document, which, as a very brief reminder for any of you that have interest in policy and governance stuff, there's a draft that's been put together to update the governance processes as they apply to creating new regional internet registries, RIRs. It's from ICANN. It was published, I think, at the start of this calendar year for comment. Comments were received, it's been revised, so this is the second draft, which is again open for comment from the community. And I think and so different people are going around the various RIR meetings to make sure that the wider community is as aware as possible about this. There's also a blog post, for example, on APNIC and various other things as well. So there's a little bit of publicity running around at the moment, but this will be an hour dedicated to that. The same thing happened at the last RIPE meeting when it was at the first draft stage. So from my humble opinion, it's good to see that they're pushing quite hard to draw attention to what's in the document and encouraging feedback from anyone that might be interested. And then Monday rounds off with a welcome reception between 7 and 9 p.m, which I think is in the main hotel. Running straight into Tuesday, again, I've selectively picked out a few things. There's obviously a lot more on the agenda. So in I think the second plenary of the day, there's what's new at the IETF, one of the sessions in that plenary. So it's not the whole of the hour and a half. It's, I think, maybe 20, 25 minutes. Suresh from the IESG, I think, is giving that presentation. So useful to get their sense of what's going on in the IETF. Then within MAT, which is measurement and something, I can't remember what the something is, one of the RIPE working groups, there's sort of 4 topics that caught my eye. Firstly, Jeff Houston of APNIC is presenting network measurement in the dark, which is talking about the impact of encryption and how it's making, well, I would infer from the very short description, so measurement of the performance of the internet harder. So it's talking to some of the challenges of encryption as it's gradually encroached, if you will, on the originally open internet. There's also a short piece on the piracy guard developments within Italy, which we sort of touched on. It was in the news last week as well. So just talking about the impact of that. And then, as you can see, a session on Anycast, and also just really for interest more than anything else, who is really running email. A short piece. Trying to think, I can't remember who's presenting that, but anyway, so there's 4 topics, none of which are terribly long within that overall hour and a half session, which caught my eye. Sadly, in parallel to that is the security working group. So you clearly can't do both simultaneously, although they are all recorded. 2 things that caught my eye there. The main one being reflections on the recent Europol cybercrime conference, which the chair of the security working group is giving that presentation. And then secondly, also interesting, I think this is a research-led presentation on RegCheck, which is a real-time approach for flagging potentially malicious domain name registrations. And So the idea is it's a system that's been developed and is proposed to proactively flag suspicious domains at the point of registration, which I think is a really interesting idea and potentially very helpful way to maybe curb DNS abuse. Who knows? I haven't seen the presentation yet. Also on Tuesday in the evening is a networking event from 9 till 11:30 p.m. From memory, all of these are funded within the registration fee, by the way. No charge for the beer at the events, which is a fine idea. Rolling into Wednesday, there's a DNS working group between 11 and 12:30, which is obviously quite relevant. I sort of mentioned this briefly on the call last week as well. This is the current agenda, making local route a best current practice, TOD resilience in the light of signature validity constraints, XOT in practice, DNS TTL upper limits in practice, and RIPE NCC DNS update. So that's that latter one being an update from one of the RIPE NCC team on their DNS operations, I believe. Again, all relatively short 10 to 15-minute presentations, given there's an hour and a half sort of time constraint to the overall slot. So later on in the day, in the community plenary, there's a discussion about the new RIPE Fellowship, a way to try and bring in sort of new participants that sort of stay in the community, to sort of bring in new blood, and also an update on IANA developments. And then, so rounding off the day, this is the topic that Sarah covered on this call a few weeks ago, and I know was covered also last week at OARC, ADOT and ADOC deployment collaboration. So that's continuing that discussion, which will, I believe, also continue into a side meeting at the IETF 124 session in Montreal, first week of November, and we'll cover again on this call in January. And then sort of to finish the day is the sort of the more formal dinner of the week between 8 and 11:30. Then finally, and I'll pause for breath. Not that, I must have copied something badly. I did, clearly already said those things. On the Friday, the only things I pulled out in the closing plenary were, unsurprisingly, towards operational security best practices for DNS in the Internet of Things, picking up on the topic that Abby and Jim touched on last week, and also transparent DNS forwarders on the misuse potential in DNS amplification attacks, which I think is fairly self-explanatory. So potential abuse risk for malicious activity. And it finishes with lunch on the Friday. So those are in the session immediately prior to lunch. Okay, that's a really fast run through of things that caught my eye. Let me pause there. Either anyone's got any sort of comments or thinks I've missed out anything significant or has anything else to say. So anyone want to jump in? No, I'm not seeing anyone with their hand raised or typing. Something strange has happened with my screen, which is slightly disconcerting. Let me try and tidy that up. Oh, that's better. Suddenly it disappeared, which made it a bit more challenging. Okay, well, in that case, hopefully that was useful. Reminder, obviously you can attend in person or remotely. From memory, I'm pretty sure RIPE uses Meet Echo, so the same remote access tool as for the IETF meetings, which is an excellent tool in my view. So that's a bonus for remote participants in particular. That simplifies and improves the remote access. So if you are thinking of registering, I think it's well worthwhile even if it's just for some of the sessions. Okay, if there are no questions, I'll then plough on with our full agenda. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the workshop that took place last week, co-hosted by the Internet Architecture Board and W3C, on age-based restrictions on content access, which I seem to have a problem saying out loud. So by way of background, it was a 3-day workshop in London. Participation was invitation only, mainly. There were a couple of exceptions on sorry, I lost my thread. Invitation only, sort of mainly in person. There were, I think, 3 or 4 remote participants, but it was principally in person, kindly hosted by Cloudflare in their offices within the old City Hall in central London, for any of you who are familiar with that. It was conducted under the modified Chatham House rule, which means there's no issue, as is always the case, talking about what was discussed within the meeting, just not attributing it. The modification is that the plan is to publish notes from the meeting, including an indication of who attended, even though I think individual comments won't be attributed, and that will be subject to each individual agreeing. So possibly not everyone that attended will be listed, but that's the plan. In terms of those notes, if I was guessing, probably won't come out until very end of this year, beginning of next year, because the content will need to be agreed with all of the attendees prior to publishing. And certainly previous IAB workshops, there's been a bit of a time lag between the workshop taking place and the notes coming out. I'm sure they'll be discussed at the IAB open session in Shenzhen, if not before. In terms of sort of format, there was sort of a large number of submitted papers, and those are already publicly available. And potentially most of the people that were invited, with 1 or 2 exceptions, would have authored or co-authored the papers. That was one of the criteria I think the chairs used to determine who to invite. There were also people in attendance from the IB and W3C's tag group as well. And the format was principally 2 or 3 short presentations to prime a particular aspect of discussion, then an open discussion in plenary before moving on to the next topic. So some input to sort of whet our appetite, and then the discussion took place on that topic before moving on, and it was a reasonably gentle pace to ensure that there was a reasonable depth to the discussion, although it did feel quite intense. Well, it did to me anyway. Any of the others that were there that wish to comment, do so in a second. So the initial thoughts, it's a complicated topic. So this, just in case it wasn't self-evident from the title, this is on the back of a number of countries where there's regulation either in place or pending that will require age-based or some form of age verification prior to letting you have access to particular content types. The easy example being adult content in the UK, where you have to be age verified to be 18 or above to have access to adult content. There will be other examples, either current or coming in other countries, such as I think in Australia, not in place yet, but you will have to prove that you're at least 16 to have access to social media. There was to greatly sort of simplify 2.5 days of discussion. To me, particularly useful aspects were around homing in on what could be the basis, for a common vocabulary, and also a sort of a structure for how you different points where you could implement controls. So, for example, the device operating system, the application, the network, or the the content provider being the four main points, but so with pros and cons for each of those. And some of the pros and cons for some of the different aspects were discussed through the conversation, so no, all will be reflected within the notes when they appear. Some of the more common concerns that came out were one loosely around internet fragmentation, where different people would have a different internet experience depending on possibly the country that they're in and their age, where there may or may not be controls, etc., etc. Now, the potential for increased harm through an age-gated infrastructure, whether that's a good or a bad thing. Certainly the increased harm through a potential loss of privacy, if the age gating is implemented in a way that isn't privacy preserving, and the potential from the sort of the chilling effect of the threat of surveillance, where that might cause people to temper their expressed opinions, etc., what they engage with, even if they're not being surveyed, because they feel they might be. There's some obvious counters to that around, for example, whether there's significant harm being inflicted at the moment and whether age gating may reduce those harms. And also, and it's probably overly long to explore on this call in a few minutes, the downsides of absolute privacy and absolute anonymity. And there's some interesting research in that space, but as I say, it's maybe this isn't the right venue for that, but happy to maybe discuss that offline if anyone's of interest. So that's probably as much as I was going to say on that, because it was only last week and I've had enough time to properly reflect on it. Let me pause there in case either anyone's got any comments or questions, or indeed anyone else that was there wishes to add additional comments, perhaps much better insights than my first thoughts.
Can't claim any insights, Andrew, but the two things that I felt from it were a kind of sense of challenge that the size of this issue doesn't lend itself to any given organization out there, which I think is shown by the fact that this was, W3C, IETF, and so forth. But even then, I think there's a lot of people who are working on small points around this challenge, and it's difficult to see how it can be more coordinated, and that's even without having very many sort of policy flavored people kicking around in the room. So I think it's going to be interesting, and secondly, that for me, as I said at the time, this is age verification is absolutely a means and not an end. Our end is looking after young people online, and that end is even broader. So suffers even worse from those problems. So, yeah, sorry to be a bit like doom and gloom there. Yeah, there's got to be something positive comes out of this. Let's hope so.
Yeah, there's all. I should have said it's a bit late now for you. I guess, Tom, but clearly by definition, although it was under the Chatham House rule, should anyone comment on their experience in the meeting, then it's reasonably obvious you were probably present, even though the Chatham House rule applied. So, yeah, sorry about that. But
I don't mind who says what about what I said. I'm cool.
Fantastic. Okay, a few hands raised. Simon, did you want to comment?
Yeah, more of a question than comment, please, as one of these policy-flavoured persons, unless I work for the government. I'm interested in sort of where you think it might go. I can well see that IETF and W3C are difficult places for it to go, but we have a number of these parallel sort of questions around the internet, where we tie where we want to tie standards with regulation, and we have sort of relatively clear defined routes for for longer term areas from telecommunication, but it's different to see. Sorry, not different. It's difficult to see where we can go on the internet because clearly IETF and W3C are not set up for that. There's a degree of almost animosity towards government involvement and question and trying to construct things that go anywhere near regulation. So, apart from the sort of almost most simple total technical issues that obviously sort of IETF and W3C probably would absorb, how do we go? Where could we go from these sort of things? I appreciate that's probably a whole conference in itself, but interested in the reactions, please.
It probably is, but I'll have a go in less than 3 minutes. You can tell me afterwards how well I did. And I'll wrap in the comment from Philippe in the chat at the same time. So Philippe, yeah, it was a pretty balanced discussion given the potential for a lot of disagreement, particularly if you knew who the mix of participants was. So, yeah, everyone was pretty well behaved. I think that was greatly helped by one of the precursors in, if you like, the ground rules in setting it up was outer scope was whether it was a good idea. So whilst people could sort of talk towards that by looking at some of the pros and cons of different aspects. They'd already said, yeah, we have to assume this is coming because politicians, regulators, etc. So it was how to do it rather than whether it should be done was kind of more the slant of the discussion. I think by setting it up in that way, that was a very insightful and took out some of the toxicity. Answering your question though, Simon, I think it doesn't easily pigeonhole into just one place. There are probably aspects that probably are proper to W3C from my limited knowledge of that body. Definitely there are some aspects that fit well with the IETF. But probably also, it warrants discussion, dare I say, at places like the IGF as well, assuming that continues after the whole WSIS plus 20 discussion, because it is, a change of the internet paradigm, if you like, by having the potential for age gating at scale. So even though, in my personal opinion, as a trustee of the IWF, I think that's a good thing, and probably long overdue. Nevertheless, it does mean that it's different to how it was potentially. But it was a pretty sort of grown-up discussion, for what it's worth. In my humble opinion, I might be biased. Peter.
So I just was curious, was there any chat about the Discord hack that was recently happened?
Yes, because that came up on the very first morning, because I think it was relatively current at that point. But it was pointed out that wasn't really to do with age gating, albeit in a very limited way that Discord has even done it. That was more, and I'll try and explain this better for anyone that's not familiar with it, even though it was in the news headlines this week, if you got that earlier. So where there was a breach of Discord and personal information was disclosed from people that had gone through their sort of age gating capability, so age verification, it was where they'd failed to be approved for access and had gone through an appeals process with a sort of third-party customer service organisation supporting Discord and had disclosed some of their personal information, I think, by sort of sending scanned copies of stuff on emails to the customer service organisation. So I mean, it was only touched on very briefly, and there was an acceptance, I think, from what I recollect, that it was a badly implemented approach, or maybe people had ignored the approach and just sent stuff they shouldn't have sent. I'm not sure which. So it wasn't a problem with age verification per se. It was just a problem with bad controls, a badly thought through process. That was my take from a lot of water's under the bridge since sort of first thing Tuesday morning when we kicked off, but that came up then right at the very beginning, so because it was obviously very topical.
I guess the question I wasn't there, so I don't know if this was discussed, but the question I would have thought about is not just, okay, this is not quite related to it, and forget about it. But there's going to be times when people are keeping data, they're doing it incorrectly, and that risk that if this is being required everywhere, then somebody's going to get hacked. Well, I think actually it turns out that Discord is a bit more serious than they claimed initially. But okay, cool. Just curious what the response was. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it just underscores the importance of data minimization, not storing things unnecessarily, encrypting it, etc., etc. So all normal good practices apply, even more so where it's personal information.
Yeah, and even more so if it's underage, not underage, but younger people who are doing the verification in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And there was certainly an element of the age verification. The folks involved in making money out of age verification were at pains to minimise the harm and distance it from the actual AV itself. And the folks who were, shall we say, more academic and more privacy focused were at pains to state that this wouldn't have happened had there been no age verification in the first place. So there were. I think that was probably one of the more contentious moments of the whole week.
It's one of those problems which I think is really difficult to have a correct answer to. Like I can't argue to myself and feel that I'm winning on either side, if you know what I mean. Yeah. All right. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Gianpaolo has been waiting very patiently and probably has a far more insightful comment than any I've made. Gianpaolo.
I think an interesting contrast was the fact that IETF is consensus driven, while age-based restrictions are not consensus driven, are mandated by states under their jurisdiction. And a player in internet without a strong local position may find it hard to understand and know what is the real local regulator. So while for adult content, there is some consensus on some kind of content. Even on porn, the definition is not equally distributed. So maybe some kind of category is not porn in all over the world. And for other categories, for smaller players, will be very hard to discern if they have to put age-based controls, if in their legislation something is legal. So having a gating system on the service side will be really complex for many countries.
Yeah, there was something that came up from someone, I can't remember who, so I won't try and attribute it because it'd be wrong. It talked about micro categorization of content or services, to Gianpaolo's point. So because definitions vary in lots of different sort of places, rather than having very sort of macro categorization, which might not be quite right for any given jurisdiction, far better to do micro categorization. So when you take into account the sort of definition of a specific thing in a given country, you can combine the different aspects that fit the different sort of relevant micro categorizations into a unique combination for that country. But you can combine them differently for the country next door, which has got slightly different legislation. I've probably explained that badly, but I thought it was an interesting idea, rather than having to do it custom categorization in every place.
And so for Simon, sorry, I didn't want him to be anti-democratic. It's just on the forum where it is right government are chosen, while the consensus in IETF is more self-granted. So is granted by the participation and not by somebody that decided. So it was the opposite, what sounded bad.
Yes, let's not get into the relative merits of voting systems and such. I think I'll certainly be well out of my depth. I don't know about anybody else. Okay, but so it was. I think overall it was a useful discussion. I went into it with a few doubts whether it was how constructive it was going to be. In my opinion, it was a lot more constructive than it could have been from my low sort of entering sort of expectation. So we'll see when we get the notes, but it sort of felt quite a useful sort of 3 days.
And importantly, the choice of lunch options in that general area were nothing short of astounding.
Oh yes. As an aside, Marsh Lane, about 5 minutes walk from the host offices, had a wide variety of street food from a wide variety of countries. So yeah, most appetites would be catered for, and not too expensively. Freshly cooked, all very nice. As you can see, some of us focus on the important things. Right. Let's move on. Just as a quick aside, right? So before we get into if anyone's got anything to share from OARC 45, so this is a 2-minute warning to prepare any thoughts you may have. IETF 124 takes place first week of November in Montreal. The side meetings open up on Friday. I'm very pleased to say the very first side meeting that was confirmed will take place on Tuesday at 7 p.m. local time, immediately after the end of the daily proceedings, and we'll focus on PARSEP, a network protocol for parental controls, but based on a proposal co-authored by David Wright of SWGFL, sorry, and myself. And also on Thursday in the same room between 4 and 5 p.m. A discussion on source privacy and decentralization beyond ECH. Which will be, I think, discussion will be led by Gian Paolo and possibly colleagues from Vodafone, but there's an interesting proposal which will be sort of shared in that side meeting, which I think will be a good thing to explore further. Did Gian Paolo, did you want to say anything to that before?
Yeah, very quickly. The proposal will show that ECH is protecting the SNI, so it's protecting the destinations, but in reality is creating a concentration for the identity, and the concentration in the hands of very few players.
Yes, absolutely. So hopefully if you're there in person or attending virtually, you'll be able to join both of those. There will be remote access to them both, as well as obviously in-person participation. The room that both of these sessions are in can hold 40 people. So fingers crossed, there should be plenty of space for in-person participants. Okay, let me pause there for a moment. I forgot to prepare a slide because I was doing this in a little bit of a hurry, and say, let's just see. In fact, let me stop sharing for a second. It's probably more useful. Whilst I was engrossed in that discussion about age-based content restrictions, simultaneously the OARC 45 meeting was taking place in Stockholm. I had a fantastic agenda from what I could see. Anyone that was either there in person or remotely want to just share anything from their observations from that? If you do, feel free to unmute and do so.
It was very well attended. I can say that.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Very well attended, I thought.
When I last checked, there's about 120 or so people registered, give or take, maybe slightly more than that. So it's certainly a good number for OARC.
I think particularly with lots and lots of newcomers and young folk, which is really, really encouraging to see.
Yes, it's sad to think though that young folk, for most of us, yeah, younger.
Young folk. Who invited them?
Yeah, terrible idea. Okay, any other comments from anyone? Any other initial impressions? Any sort of standout things that you took away?
I talked to the PC, they're doing a great job.
It's a little quiet. I'm not sure if that's
really quiet, yeah.
Intended to be shared or was just not accidentally unmuted microphone.
Sorry about that, wrong mic. I'm very, very pleased with the PC that in at least the last two conferences, I think the technical aspect of the presentations has been getting better. So hats off to that. I'll post in chat. There's one presentation about how we can raise the bar on DNS administration, which is maybe a little name and shame for one part of the industry, but it led me to the discovery that there is a DNS best operations practices group, and that they have a Mattermost channel that might be worth going into.
You talking about the new group, the working group, or the charter working group, I guess?
No, I was just looking at the existing one. Sorry.
Is this the initiative that Phil kicked off a meeting, maybe 2 meetings ago, wanting to call out best practices, not to create new best practices, is my understanding, but to identify best practices where they exist and make sure they're documented and shared with the wider community. As a sort of a
that discussion was Monday.
Okay.
So it was before the meeting. Yes, that did happen, and I think was very productive. And we've started bringing some people together to kind of set a charter for that and kind of set parameters around it. And there is a group of Mattermost discussing that specifically, and that was announced in the lightning talks. Matthias from ISC announced it, so that he and I and some others, Jim, were involved in some of those discussions, and obviously looking for others to add input where they feel needed.
Yeah. I can see a couple of comments in the chat in addition to yours, Eric. I think Peter saw the best practice presentation. It was also presented at the APAC DNS forum, and David thought that the academic research on a large language model approach for DNS threat intel was very interesting. Yeah, and I think there's a similar presentation on that topic at RIPE as well in a couple of weeks. So, yeah, that seems to be a direction of travel to try and get on top of some of the DNS abuse.
Completely selfishly, Andrew, I'm gonna remind folks that Ollie kindly took to the stage and talked about Nominet's DNS fund. There's a couple of weeks left on that, so if you are either developing something open source in the DNS space that you think might meet the requirements, or you know somebody who is, then please, we still have a couple of weeks for those applications, and we are keen to get as many as we can.
Yes, and yes, certainly, definitely do that. I should say, disappointingly, because I joined the webinar on the same topic a week or so ago, after it was covered on this call a week before that. They didn't seem taken with my DNS Vegas project, which mainly involved giving me lots of money for me to go to Vegas to do something. There seemed to be the need for milestones with objectives against them before money was passed on, which I think was sad.
DNS related. Maybe you could, I don't know, apply for .vegas or something if that's not already registered. I understand ICANN are about to, do round 2 or something.
Good point. Very good point. I have to say, yes, Hugh seemed sceptical that was an appropriate use of Nominet's fund. I was much more enthusiastic about the idea. Anyway, yeah, hopefully there are people on here that have got slightly more relevant uses than me spending lots of time with chips in Vegas. Okay, well, let's move on. I was disappointed not to be able to go to Stockholm, albeit the IBW3C workshop was also very good. It's a shame that they coincided, but these things happen. Right, let me reshare my screen. I'm just going to very quickly just call out some of the more interesting things in the news from the last week or so, which if you're on the mailing list, you would have seen mailer earlier today. Probably the one that caught my eye the most was this piece, the first on the screen, about whether the growth of AI, specifically agentic AI, might lead to a enormous growth in the number of registered domains. And it's only a short article, but it sort of posits an idea of between 10 and 50 billion domains over the next 25 years versus 350 million now. So quite a significant year-on-year growth for the next little while. Interesting idea, and I think it's worth just being mindful that that could happen. Obviously, completely sort of programmatically driven registration in that case. Link to that maybe, and just touching on something which Carl mentioned just now, reminder that the ICANN have got their sort of next GTLD round coming up next year. So there's a piece from Anna Dobrowolska, CEO of Domain Crawler, just with her thoughts on that. And then the other one I wanted to mention specifically in the Excellent Adam Networks podcast, there was a discussion with Josh from Infoblox, just see he's not on the call this week. I know Ross is, sort of talking about the risk of data exfiltration if people don't take care of their DNS infrastructure. So make sure you listen in to that when you get an opportunity. I'm sure there were other interesting things, but I think that was the main topic of conversation on that. There were a whole load of other things. I'm not sure it'd be appropriate to go through them all. A couple of things on Anycast, as you can see at the top of the screen, sort of the two different topics, both on the APNIC block, and also some thoughts on how to overcome some of the challenges of DNSSEC through automation from Enrique Vacara, and another piece on the ICP2 review, which said is going to be a discussion, one of the BOFs in RIPE in a week's time. So there's a bit more about it. I posted on the RIPE. I think I said it was on APNIC. It wasn't. It was on RIPE. The RIPE blog in the run up to their meeting, which makes good sense. Plenty of other things. Maybe the one other one I mentioned in the interest of time was this one on pig butchering, the rather horrible name given to sort of longer term investment fraud. But a really in-depth piece yet again from Infoblox from the threat research team, just sort of talking about that and some of the ways that it can be identified with sort of network level fingerprints, including from the DNS, to help disrupt some of the many thousands of scam domains, how to do that in a structured way. So always excellent stuff from that team, which I'm impressed with repeatedly. Other things, probably not enough time. The final agenda is now available for the IETF 124 meeting. It was in draft this time last week. That's now published in full. Given the workshop, I also put a couple of pieces sort of linked to the IB workshop title. One on that Discord piece. Agard wrote about that, and I'm not convinced it's really a fundamental problem with age verification. It's just a fundamental problem with doing things in a sloppy way. And similarly, ECHO, the Industry Association, published a piece. Klaus Landefeld published a piece against scanning messaging services for CSAM. And yourself shares the sort of contrary thoughts on that, specifically on client-side scanning at the very bottom of the screen. I don't think it does break encryption. That'll probably be the summary of that, but you can read both if you're interested and draw your own conclusions. Then just briefly, there's loads of other stuff. We won't have time to go through that caught my eye. apologies for that, but maybe slightly less than last week. So on the positive side, but plenty of other things happening in the world. More importantly, if you want to nominate anyone, including yourself, for an IETF leadership position, you have until close of play today to do that, so don't forget. A few other deadlines coming up, probably the most important one, if you want to go to the IETF, either virtually or in person, register by next Monday, otherwise you go from the early registration rates to the standard rate. So you've missed the super early rate. The early rate, it will jump up by another, I think, a couple of $100 for in-person registration, maybe $100, I think, for remote registration if you haven't already registered. But as always, for remote registration, unlimited registration fee waivers are available. So if payment is an issue, you can have a fee waiver with no questions asked. And the bottom of the screen, 26th of October is the deadline for applications to the Nominet DNS fund if you're thinking about that. Then we've got other deadlines, but they're further off, so we won't worry about those. Loads of stuff happening this month and next, as you can see. I won't go through all of those, but the ones in bold I definitely will be at. So I will be in Bucharest and I will be in Montreal. So if you're there, it'd be good to see you and talk in person. That'd be lovely. With that in mind, there won't be a call this time next week. So if you're around, let's meet up in Bucharest instead. And then Monday week, we will do a preview of the agenda for IETF 124. But noting, you'll see the asterisk that we're now in the change from summer to winter. So we'll move from 1500 to 1600 UTC. So the call on the 27th October onwards will be at 1600 UTC. So for, I think, North America, that means that we're out by an hour for a couple of weeks and then we get back into the normal time of day. For those of us in Europe, we'll stay at the same time of day, albeit it would have shifted by an hour, kind of. But anyway, that's just a reminder. So no call next week. Let's talk over coffee or beer in Bucharest. We will have a call following week, but just bear in mind the time change from which will have kicked in the preceding weekend. Right. With a pause there, 3 minutes to go. There's a little bit information dense, but hopefully it was useful. Let me stop sharing and see if anyone else has got anything you want to talk about or go back to, refer back to. Oh yes, and of course, in between the RIPE and the IETF meetings, ICANN is meeting for the annual ICANN AGM, which runs for a week in Dublin. So Peter, for one, will be there. No doubt there will be other people as well. So that's a good place to be. I won't be there because I'll be on holiday in New York. Otherwise, it would have been fun. New York will be fun as well. I should hasten to add in case my family are listening. Be awkward otherwise. Right. Anything else from anyone else? If so, put something in the chat or just unmute and talk. Either's fine. Nope. Okay. Well, let's stop there with the thanks to our sponsors, DNS OARC, again for the sponsorship, much appreciated. I hope that was useful, everyone. Have a great week. See some of you in Bucharest, no doubt. We can sort of sort out everything there over beer as one does. I'm sure that'd be marvelous. Otherwise, have a great time and speak to you in 2 weeks when we're talking all things about the forthcoming IETF agenda. So have a great couple of weeks in the meantime. Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Yes, Andrew.